For me, depression has felt like a black smoke that kind of clouds everything that I see. So my intention was help me clear the smoke so I could step out into my fullest color. And prior to spring 2020, I had never painted abstract and I had never really painted in color. I primarily did super realistic pen and charcoal figure drawings. The symbolism there is so wild. Like, I had these drawings that were highly controlled and I felt called to literally play. And I discovered I loved color and that maybe I had been holding back from color my whole life.
Welcome to the Awaken Leader podcast, transformative stories with plant medicine by One Heart. In each episode, we'll speak one-on-one with high-performing, heart-centered leaders and conscious creators. We'll go deep on how their lives have been transformed from their work with sacred psychedelic plant medicine within our unique One Heart container. You'll hear stories from CEOs, changemakers, and creatives on their experience. Learn how these moments have propelled them to elevate their life and the lives of those around them. Each guest has completed One Heart's 8-week Human Accelerator for Life Elevation program. The One Heart container brings together 40 amazing, heart-centered leaders for an epic 1-week transformational journey in Costa Rica, plus 7 weeks of virtual preparation and integration before and after. Our intention with this podcast is to plant a seed within your heart that we are all powerful, conscious creators capable of manifesting our most aligned lives filled with joy, fulfillment, and love. Our mission is to elevate the life, work, and community of heart-centered leaders by reminding them our truth, that I am you, you are me, we are one. My name is Brandon Evans, Chief Elevation Officer at One Heart. In today's episode, we welcome Alex Maceda, also known as Amac, from One Heart Journeys 6, 9, and 12. Alex Maceda is a Stanford MBA and former high-level startup executive, now enjoying her career as an artist and writer living in Joshua Tree, California. Her energetic, abstract work and lyrics are inspired by the desert landscape and human emotional and spiritual themes. Her paintings have appeared in shows across the world, including Los Angeles, Portland, Joshua Tree, and Madrid. She was one of the first traditional abstract artists to enter the NFT space and has sold over 150 paintings of original work. Prior to focusing on art, Amac had a successful career in the brand and consumer startup world at companies like Landing Space, Two Chairs, Everlane, and LaFleur. She advises numerous brands and venture funds and co-directs Metacurious, a Web3 marketing accelerator. In this episode, Alex shares the synchronicities and events that led her to sit with ayahuasca for the first time at One Heart, how living society's dream fueled depression rather than fulfillment in her life, her intentions for her journeys, and how ayahuasca gave her what she needed, not what she wanted. Her journey from being trapped within her mind to expressing herself fully from the heart, and how her creativity and life have flourished since her first One Heart journey. Alex and I also discuss the importance of preparation and integration to support the invaluable insights she received, the ease of giving love and gratitude, and the challenges we've faced learning to receive, returning to a role of service on her third One Heart journey and her path of growth that led her there, and so much more. We hope that Alex's story strikes a chord in you and reminds you that you're capable of these powerful transformations as well. Now please enjoy our episode with Alex Maceda. Welcome, Alex Maceda, to the Awaken Leader podcast.
So happy to be here.
Great to have you. There's so many stories. I mean, we obviously have a lot of stories from the 500 plus entrepreneurs we've had on our One Heart journeys. And I often find myself coming back to your story, just the depth of the transformation. I think I resonate a lot with kind of the before and and certainly parts of the after. And so very excited to have you here to tell that story and share that.
It has been quite the wild ride, but amazing.
Yeah. So you'll tell much better than me, but I just wanted to hit on a few points. So you were a Stanford Business School grad, working hard in the Bay Area in the startup world. I was doing very similar things in New York. and certainly know what that grind is like, and the world of startups, and kind of constantly chasing the next dream. So I'd love to hear, start with the before you came on a One Heart journey, really paint the picture for what your life was like, who you were, kind of what values you were living by. What did that, who was Alex Maceda?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago because it was. So before I came to One Heart, February 2020, which what a wild time to come to One Heart. But to paint the picture before, fall 2019, like you mentioned, I was 2 years out of Stanford Business School. I had this whole career in business. I worked at a top consulting firm and then at an early stage startup. And then I went to business school thinking I was going to found my own company. And I had lived this like very high achieving life. But I think what was interesting about my before is in a lot of ways, by that time, I felt like I was already, quote unquote, like living by a mission. I was out of consulting and for the first time working at a startup that actually was doing something I really believed in. I was already working at a mental health startup, helping people, building therapy clinics in the Bay Area and helping people get into therapy. And by all accounts, like on the surface, my life looked like I had everything. So I was one of the most senior people at this startup. I was in a serious relationship with someone I considered to be one of my best friends. I was on what I thought was like the other side of a pretty hard journey with mental health. So I had struggled with depression all throughout my 20s and kind of had a big breakdown in business school, which led me to work in mental health. So in a lot of ways, I felt like I had already figured a lot of stuff out. I had great friends and living in the Bay Area. But on a personal level, I kind of felt, on a good day, I felt miserable. On a normal day, I could only describe it as like feeling kind of like apathetic. Like things were good, like I knew things were good, quote unquote, but I wasn't very happy.
What did you attribute that to? What was coming up for you at that time?
I mean, I think one of the things about being an kind of like a high achiever is I had lived all of my life to that point, believing like if I worked hard, if I put more hours in, I would achieve whatever I set out to achieve. I like really lived by this kind of like self-agency, like grind mindset, like you mentioned. And at that point, and for all intents and purposes, that's allowed me to achieve a lot of stuff in my life. But I think at that point, it became more of a detriment to me than like a benefit, in that I was like, okay, I've worked so hard on this mental health journey. I've been in therapy at that time on and off for 7 or 8 years. And it felt like I still wasn't getting anywhere, or it felt more like I had hit this ceiling, and more hours weren't working. So yeah, I think like who I was at that point, right? It's like I was starting to achieve a lot of the things in my career that I set out to achieve. I had been offered like a VP position at my startup. I was being asked to speak at big conferences. And I just kind of looked around and was like, this doesn't feel how I expected it to feel. And I kind of had that moment, like, how did I get here and why am I here and why isn't it different? And I think I had the double-edged sword of then judging myself for not being happy, even though I had accomplished all of these things that I thought were going to make me happy. And that really added to it.
Yeah, as you say that, I mean, it's literally, I felt it almost taking me back, because it so resonates to what, my story, and yeah, having all these successes and just continually thinking that this next thing is what, supposed to make me happy. And then the guilt you feel because you're not happy and you have all these things, and, this constant endless wheel. And it's hard at that point to really see like what else, what else is there? Where else do I go from here? Because I'm doing all the things.
Yeah, exactly. And I was really, I could probably sum it up as I was trapped in my own head, and my head was a very smart place to be, which was a very hard place to get untrapped from.
Yes. Yeah, I think I had said something similar. It was like, my mind kept trying to find my way out. And it wasn't until I realized that there was no way out in the mind. It was like I could convince myself of pretty much anything. You could convince yourself of lots of different stories. And it wasn't until, I dropped into my heart, which was a lot of my journey, that became possible. So with that, maybe we can start to transition there. I would love to hear about your first journey. You actually were on, and we'll talk maybe some of the later experiences as well, but you were on journey 6, 9, and 12. And your first journey was right before COVID. Would love to hear, maybe what were your intentions going into that journey? And then how did that come about?
Yeah. So I loved what you said about kind of like head dropping into heart. I think prior to being in One Heart, one of the things that was really driving me crazy in a lot of ways is, as I mentioned, I had been in therapy for a long time. Like conceptually, I knew that I could step out of things, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So crucially, kind of like two things happened prior to One Heart that a little bit led me to be on that journey, which was I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And I also read Vessel van der Kolk, I think his name is, book on trauma. And Michael Pollan has this metaphor that I really love. Your brain is like a ski slope, and you start to ski down. And once you make tracks, you follow kind of the easiest path down. So you follow the same tracks over and over. And that's where I really felt like I was at. And then having a thoughtful experience with psychedelics is almost like a snowfall, and you get to have like a brand new experience. So that started to get me interested in maybe having some sort of guided psychedelic experience. And there's kind of a wild story about how I got introduced to One Heart, which I'll maybe save for another time, where you can link it. But going into that February journey, I had already started making a lot of big moves in my life. So by the time I came to One Heart, I had quit my job. I had ended my relationship. I kind of was like walking the walk and trying to talk the talk. Like I had made these moves, but I was having a really hard time embodying them. And I kind of felt desperate. Like I showed up to One Heart and I was like, I'm ready to give up whatever I need to give up for a fuller life. And I kind of just surrendered to the whole experience.
Yeah, there's some pieces there that I find like happen quite often on a journey. The first of which is kind of the synchronicities. And I do know the story a bit of how you came to us. Oftentimes, things start popping up and, oftentimes maybe people haven't even heard of ayahuasca or hadn't heard of One Heart. And then all of a sudden you hear about things from multiple angles, and then things start shaking out. And it's amazing how much that happens. We say like, kind of the medicine starts working before, when you commit or even before that, sometimes it starts working for you. So things start shaking in your life, preparing you for this journey. It sounds like that's what was happening for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when you say that. And I've said that to other people. And I mean, I basically in September of 2019, like committed to changing my life. And I had no idea what that was going to look like. And as you mentioned, just like things started happening. And once I committed to coming to One Heart, it really felt like, the 1 week journey started then. It was kind of a 4-month ongoing 2-year journey. So yeah, that deeply resonates. And I have seen the same thing when I've come back. But to go back to that first journey, my intention was really around depression more than anything. Like I had shook off what I felt like was the worst of it, but there was kind of this lingering fog. Like I have always used the metaphor. For me, depression has felt like a black smoke that kind of clouds everything that I see. And I was doing all of these things to get it out, but it felt like there was a lingering fog. And specifically, my intention going in was I received a Rumi poem. A friend texted me a Rumi poem, maybe like 2 weeks before our journey. And that became my intention. I pulled the line from it. And my intention was help me clear the smoke so I can step out into my fullest color. So it was like a little bit broad, but I was just like, I think, I feel, I believe life could be fuller. It could be better. Like I shouldn't be feeling just like nothing most days. and I didn't know how that was going to go. And it was quite magical.
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing knowing where the story's going to, especially around the word color, but you'll share more.
Yeah. So, I mean, I arrived at One Heart. I came in knowing no one on that first journey. I went alone. And I had never really been to any retreat experience like One Heart. Like, I had dabbled in meditation, I did yoga, but I had never gone to anything that felt kind of spiritual or transformational in the way that One Heart has been. I was very interested in that, but I didn't even have like the language to talk about it. And I found, as I mentioned, like I got so much from the experience even before arriving in Mexico. Like I took, as a, high achieving type A startup person, I took the prep extremely seriously. I did the dieta for a month. I did all of the exercises. And I self-identified as someone who was really interested in personal development. So as I started, I was like, I've done these exercises before. But so much really was revealed to me even before I got to the retreat. Notably, because of kind of my work environment, I was really disconnected from my body. And that was not even something I realized until I started doing the dieta. Like, I talk about it now, and it's so common for people who work at these like high impact jobs. But, I needed 3 or 4 cups of coffee to stay awake during the day. I needed a sleeping pill or 2 glasses of wine to then put myself to sleep at night, to then wake up the next day. I was like highly anxious. I would cry at least one time at work, but I was like performing. And I now look at that and I was like, I was literally drugging myself. Like, we don't call those drugs, but they are. I needed uppers to keep myself awake, downers to get myself to go to sleep. So even like doing the dieta and not being able to have coffee, one of the things I realized, I was like, I am just so tired. So tired. And that's not something that I even knew.
Yeah. So for our listeners, I just wanted to clarify what a dieta is.
Oh, yes.
And the importance of that. So the dieta, normally we ask people to do it for 2 weeks. You star students and did it for the month. And the dietas are really important, process kind of going into these. It's basically physical, spiritual, emotional healing or cleansing that really supports you on the journey. So there's a lot of foods like caffeine and alcohol and prescription drugs that affect your mind and your body that are really important to cleanse of. And then also the process of doing the dieta, as you're kind of describing, really allows you to start kind of recognizing a lot of things that you don't recognize because you're so used to, whether it's grabbing a bag of chips or, a sleeping pill, you're not having those moments where you're normally reflecting and sitting in your emotions. And so, yeah, that process going in is really important. And we have a lot of exercises and readings and things that also kind of support that going into the journey.
Yeah. And that, that wasn't an intention at all. I didn't even know it could be an intention. It was so far from kind of my awareness at the time, and was really transformational for how I live my life now. But so lots of things starting to happen even before I got to Mexico, which was where my first journey was. And then coming in, that kind of like type A energy, I even took into ceremony. I was reflecting on it before this call, and it is very funny kind of what happened. So, I came in with this intention of healing my depression. I had been learning about trauma, and without going too much into it, I had kind of convinced myself that there was some kind of trauma either that I had suppressed or someone in my family had suppressed that was kind of blocking me from going forward. And so I kind of had the second intention to let go of that, however that may be. I heard about hard ceremonies, and I was mentally prepared to have a really hard one. I know that sometimes people relive past traumas, or you have some kind of like very difficult thing that you see, and I was kind of ready for that. So I went into my first ceremony in a lot of ways, like not scared of what could happen, but also pretty sure of what was going to happen, which is the funny part. And yeah, I'm just like, I know what's going to happen. I have an agenda. Here are the things that we're going to do. And the medicine was like, no, no, no. But actually in my first ceremony, I had a pretty hard first ceremony physically. Like there was a lot of purging, but one of the only things I saw in that ceremony was like a really beautiful egg, actually. Like I saw all of these female ancestors of mine holding out this egg to me. And I heard the medicine say to me, you have to purge it. Like, this is the thing that you have come here to purge. And I was crying and I was saying, it's so beautiful. I can't do it. I can't do it. And I kept hearing over and over, it has to be you. And that was not at all what I expected to see. I couldn't do it in that first ceremony. I came back for my second ceremony, and I was ready. I was like, okay, tonight we're going to open the egg. I'm going to purge this for myself, and for my family. And I was shown in that second ceremony, I was lying in the maloka. I was looking kind of up at the ceiling, and what I could see was sunrise and sunset over and over. It was like the stars were turning to day, and then it was turning to night again, day, night, and it was so beautiful. But at the time, I was like, I literally kind of said, okay, this is very beautiful, but this is not what I came here to see. Like, I came here to heal.
It's a business.
And yeah, get to business. Yeah. And, it was one of the most profound experiences, because what I was told back was, don't you see, the universe, like time is going on without you. Are you ready to come along, or are you determined to relive your past traumas? And I was just thrown flat on my back. And I was like, but what about the egg? Like, I need to see it to be able to heal it. And I was told, you don't need to know what's inside. You don't need to see it. Like, we don't carry that anymore. You're just allowed to step forward. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, because so much, we started this interview saying I was so in my head. I was like so determined and hardworking. And I realized I had this very deeply held belief that things were supposed to be hard. Like, I was just supposed to work harder. And it had really been informed by my mental health journey. It was like, I worked so hard in my 20s to climb out of like a pretty deep depression. And I didn't know what it was like for things to be easy. And I didn't know what it was like, maybe just like for things to be beautiful and have joy. I thought I needed answers to everything. And that part of my journey was just like, you get to step forward now.
Such a powerful message for, the people that come on our journeys. I mean, probably any journey, but I think, that's how I felt, as well. And I think many of the people, I think I interviewed you. I interview a lot of the people that come on the journeys before, and I'm always, enjoying like people in their heads, knowing where they may come out on the other side. And, it's so true that we feel like everything has to be made so challenging, so hard for us. And that's what like the startup culture and, has really embodied. It's hustle. You have to work harder than everyone else. You have to work this many hours. You put that down to your employees, and you have them working crazy hours. And then you see, kind of on the other side, you start to see some of these people, and you'll share your after obviously as well, just creating with more ease and more flow. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it took me a while. It took me a lot more than 2 ceremonies to to get that one. And I'm still getting it as I go.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful insight.
Yeah. And we haven't talked about that much, like what happens on the retreat outside, but I think like one of the most beautiful things that like I still hold with me to this day is around that time, around ceremony 2, Marie, who was one of the other facilitators on the retreat, said to me in another exercise, she took my hands and she looked me in the eye and said to me, "You've shown up, you've done the work, and now it's time to receive." And I just started crying. And so much of what I learned on that ceremony was how to receive, which I think now, like looking back at what my life was like back then, like as I mentioned, like I had everything, like I had what so many people wanted, but I wasn't letting it touch me, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like it was all on paper and it wasn't in my heart, for lack of a better word. And I kind of had this belief also that, especially as someone who had struggled with mental illness, like I had this belief that joy wasn't an emotion I could feel. I was like, oh, you know, I can be happy sometimes. I can go to parties. I have friends, but I didn't really know what like joy felt like. And that was something that I experienced for the first time in ceremony as well, my 3rd ceremony. And that
ceremony can have a lot of joy.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, I don't know if I've ever told you the story. You were part of the joy story.
Good.
So Marie had said that to me, and I remember thinking, because there's a day between 2nd and 3rd ceremonies, I was really thinking about that. I was like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to receive? It's another thing, right? Conceptually knowing you should do something, but then actually experiencing it. That's been a lot of my experience with ayahuasca. I knew conceptually from therapy, from all of this work, that I should step out, that I can let it go. But in sitting and feeling it like firsthand is really, really different. It's like that snowfall I mentioned. And in the 3rd ceremony, I experienced joy, and it was really beautiful. So this actually is a Pablo story. I was served tape by Pablo, which for those of you who are listening is a sacred form of tobacco. And it's served to you, can be served to you during ceremony. And it was something that I was not intending to partake in. But I kind of felt this call to do it. And Pablo was another one of kind of the facilitators. And I had this immense...
I said he's not gentle with his hot pace.
No, he's not. But I felt kind of after I was served it, I felt this immense joy. Like nothing I had, like, it was like bliss was emanating from every pore. Like those pictures of like Buddha is really happy, like that was me. And I was crying. I knew at that moment, I was like, this is joy. And I felt it in my hands actually. And I opened my eyes and you were a little bit away and you were having a hard time with the hape, as many people do. And I went to turn my hands and I was like, I want to send this to Brandon. And I was told, first receive it for yourself. And I realized that, and then I was told over and over to keep like literally putting my hands on my heart and I would get this wave of joy. And I realized, and this is something I'm still working on that has come up in later journeys, but my bias or like my way of moving throughout the world before is like, oh, I get something good, I should give it away. Like, oh, I learned something, I should tell someone else. I get a gift, I should share it with my sibling. And that I think is obviously like a wonderful quality to have as a person, but you should also experience it for yourself. And a lot of my journey over the past 2 years was like, what does it actually look like to experience things for myself and do things for myself before I do them for other people so that I can be more of service to other people. And that has actually been an extremely hard lesson for me. That has taken like a lot of reprogramming to feel like I deserve something like that.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. told this before, but kind of one of the reasons I think One Heart is here is I felt a lot of that growing up. I felt a lot of love from my parents, and like almost like they lived their lives for me and gave so much to me. And I think I developed this, it's hard to figure out how to give it back or how to receive it myself. It was always like, how do you give this energy, and how do you give back all that you've received? And I think, the impetus of starting One Heart was like to create that and to give back in a way that was meaningful. But ultimately, it's the challenge, I guess, along the way is how do you receive that for yourself? And I think it's always something that I'm working on, because there's all this love, there's all this stuff going out, and then how do you actually receive that so you can replenish yourself and you can be strong to continue to do the work that you're doing and do what you're meant to do here.
Yeah, that really resonates. Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot that I have learned throughout the past couple of years of like being more of an and than an or person. Like it created a lot of like false dichotomies in my head. Like I can be, if I am not of service, then I am selfish. But what if I am of service to myself and of service to other people at the same time? And those are actually reinforcing and not in kind of opposition to one another. It's a very different way of thinking.
Sure. Awesome. So I want to touch a little bit on maybe how, you've come back a couple of times. You've come back a few journeys later and as a participant. And then in Journey 12, we have a role called Elevation Leader, which is participant. And then we also, you also really help guide. We break the group down into 4 different groups, and you help guide about 10 new souls through the process and get to share your experience and get to hold space for them. So I'm very curious to learn, about that, evolution really. And I remember you were kind of considering, or we were talking about an elevation leader position, I think when you came for Journey 9, and you ultimately determined you weren't ready. So I'd love to hear how you became ready and what that's all looked like.
Yeah, I was. You remember correctly. So I've been to 3 One Hearts. My life completely changed after that first One Heart. What has been so beautiful is when I came on J6, I really felt like I was almost like below an average I needed to be at. I think coming back for J9 and J12 is like, I feel the happiest I've ever felt, like the most fulfilled I've ever felt in my life. And now I know that I could still go up and further, that like I can actually be of service to other people. And that I think came, I don't say that lightly. And when I came back as an elevation leader on J12, and when I kind of started the process, but then pulled out J9, I had this belief. I was like, I have nothing to offer these people. Like, what am I going to say to people coming to One Heart? Like, what am I going to tell them? Like, I have nothing to share, which obviously I do. So there was, for me, like healing. Yeah, here we are. Yeah, there was, I think really like part of my process of like where I want to go next, came through being an elevation leader. Like you and Tim having the trust in me, like me developing the trust in myself to like say that I do have something to offer and I do have something to share, and maybe I can be of help to someone. And a lot of times when I think about that, I'm like, I often think about what would I have wanted to hear, or what did I need to hear a few years ago that would have made me comfortable stepping forward. And that's kind of how I've approached it since. So, I mean, the elevation leader experience was so powerful for me. It's like a bonus.
Yeah, I love the elevation leader role. And like, sometimes I know immediately, like, we have someone coming on our journey on this next journey. Actually, he was the last podcast guest right before you, or I think right before you, Sharif. And I just saw him on Journey. I'm like, you're going to be an elevation leader. Now he's coming back. But it's always beautiful to watch that role because, we try to really create an experience around it as well. There's a lot of like trainings and group calls and things that we do together, because that really is the next level when you're able, once you start, kind of working through a lot of these things, the next level is really service. And without service, you kind of continue to hit that wall. So you kind of have to move into that space. And for some, that's their first taste of service. For others, it's just another maybe deeper experience of it. But I always love seeing people step up and seeing their energy. And it's become such a huge part of the One Heart journey. I feel like you can kind of know from the elevation leaders how the journey is going to go and how different groups will go. And it's always great kind of forming those. Friends.
Yeah. I mean, it creates like so much possibility for people just to see someone who looks like them, however they define that, who just is a little bit ahead of them on the journey. For me, it was like really reassuring to have examples like that of like, oh, this is what it could be like. It's really tangible. And you did it too. And maybe I can do it too.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd love to also, get back into is where you came out maybe after, that first journey and since, because I love how the transition has unfolded for you and how you've really been able to tap into so many passions and just feels like you're living so much of that now. So I'd love to hear more about, who Alex Maceda Mac is now and what's going on with you.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I was on Journey 6, which was the last week of February 2020. I'd quit my job and I basically flew to Mexico. And when we emerged from Journey 6, 1 week, maybe 10 days later, the world shut down because of COVID. So I had this plan after Mexico. I was going to do 3 months of travel. I was planning to move to LA. I didn't have my next job lined up. I knew I wanted to take a little bit of a break. I knew I wanted to do something more creative. I had been an artist my whole life as a hobby and was taking kind of, I was doing marketing and brand, so pretty creative roles, but within a business context. And I knew I was probably going to freelance, but like my plan was basically to travel. And obviously that didn't happen. I had this really transformational experience. And then I was effectively trapped in my apartment with my dog for the next, however many months. And during that time, I started painting every day. So I minored in art in college. I always joked, oh, when I retire, I'm going to be an artist, because being an artist is like obviously not a quote unquote real career. No one in my family is an artist. My parents have always been supportive of my creativity, but as someone who was smart, I went to like real school. But during the beginning of the pandemic, I started painting every day. I started writing more, and I've always been passionate about writing, but I've never let anyone read my creative writing. And even before I started, I now have like an Instagram account for my art, but even before I started that account, the first place I shared my art with was in our One Heart WhatsApp. I was painting some of the things I had seen in ceremony. I was kind of like processing in a lot of ways the experience I had through art, and it felt like a really safe place to share. Like I was really afraid of sharing my art at the time. But I started sharing it on the WhatsApp, and then I started an art Instagram. And next thing I knew, I had sold a painting, and then I had sold another painting. And by the end of the year, I was making more money on painting than I was freelancing. And so now, 2 years later, almost 3 years later, I'm an artist. I moved to Joshua Tree about like a year after probably that first One Heart experience. I am an artist and a writer. Like I am writing a book. I'm writing my first book. I like read my poetry out loud to people. And it was like it literally was the life I dreamed about. Like I was like, oh, when I retire and I'm done with all the things I'm supposed to do, I'm going to have this life, but I am living it now. And the funny thing, going back to my intention, I have found, ayahuasca has quite a a sense of humor in my experience is my intention was help me clear the smoke so I could step out into my fullest color. And I now paint in color. So if you look at my work, I'm primarily an abstract painter who paints with very bright colors. Prior to spring 2020, I had never painted abstract and I had never really painted in color. I primarily did super realistic pen and charcoal figure drawings, which just the symbolism there is so wild. Like I had these drawings that were like highly controlled, and I felt called to just literally play. And I discovered I loved color and that maybe I had been holding back from color my whole life.
Well, you said that in your intention. I was thinking of your painting.
Which is so crazy to me. Yeah. Literally never had painted abstract. And now I'm an abstract painter and it brings me so much joy.
Yeah. I remember you sharing your art. It was during our like integration period and you know, the group just kind of being a little blown away by, wow, like where did this come from? And, you know, you just being able to kind of create out of seemingly nowhere, and share that. And that was a pretty special moment. But maybe you can share more about, obviously the integration is a huge part of the One Heart experience. Few programs do kind of the before, you know, the journey and the after. And we've just found, you know, we initially offered the integration as kind of a optional thing. And we saw that the people that had done it and gone all in, just the results and the life change were so much greater that we couldn't really be offering this without the full program. And so I'd love for you to share. I know you were someone who really dove deep into it. And oftentimes the people that come back as elevation leaders are the people that, you know, we see really take that on. But maybe talk a little bit about how, obviously you have the big breakthrough in ceremony, but how important the integration is and how that really leads to, you know, kind of the life that you're living.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question. You know, as I mentioned, prior to One Heart, I was working in mental health and I was working at a therapy company. And I found a lot of the people who we would do presentations for and that kind of thing. It's like everyone's looking for the silver bullet to like make their life better. Like, oh, I go to therapy and everything gets fixed. Or, oh, I sit in an ayahuasca ceremony and everything gets fixed. But it's not that simple. I was reflecting on this, especially because I still go to weekly therapy and it has been one of my best tools. And I think in a lot of ways, like it's one of my best integration tools. I know it's not something One Heart offers, but it's kind of in the spirit of like this integration work. And, you know, to use a painting metaphor, I think like if ayahuasca is the vision, therapy is like a paintbrush. Therapy or integration is like a paintbrush, and what you do every day is the actual painting. So I have found, you know, I could have had this amazing experience and then gone back to my life and just lived it how I lived it before and nothing would have happened. But it was that commitment to being like, okay, I've seen a different path. What does it take to actually put that path into practice in my life? That's a lot easier said than done, because you're on this like beautiful retreat with all of these people. And then you come back to the situation, you know, had I been going straight back to work, it's like you're around all of the things that tempt you to be back to the way that you were before. So I found it was like absolutely invaluable to have a group, to have like consistent touch points after, where it was like, okay, we had this big experience together. Now it's challenging coming back to kind of quote unquote real life, and how do we merge the two? And that was kind of like the integration experience for me. And the support was really, you know, it was also the beginning of the pandemic, but even as I come back, like those little touch points of being like, okay, I can remember what happened here and things can be different and other people are going through the same thing. That is so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to say, I mean, we have these big breakthroughs and things may feel like they've changed for us, you know, through these journeys. but the world hasn't changed. And we're going back to the same world, the same people, the same triggers. And yes, we have more tools, we have more awarenesses, we have ways that we can maybe work with that. But it's really that commitment and that work. And, that takes people that hold you accountable. It takes other people that are on this path that can share and motivate you or vice versa. And that's really a lot of what we find, and why we stress the community aspect so deeply and the importance of, and that group was, they're all very tight, but especially with the pandemic and everything happening, I think you guys are still meeting, you've carried the integration and on your own years later, but it's just so important to have that support system and others around that really want to see the best for you and understand how to hold you to your highest and what you're actually seeking for your life, what the program stories may have been.
Absolutely. And I think it's was a good reminder for myself too. So it was the meta thing of me still showing up for myself and making the changes that I want for myself, especially kind of in the spirit of receiving. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share? I think this was an amazing interview. I resonated, I resonate so deeply with your story. I'm not quite an artist, but a lot of creativity that I've enjoyed opening up through this process, and just knowing kind of where you came from, the strength of the mind, the startup world, and where you've been able to bring that to, and living so fully. One thing I think you left out a little bit on, you've become an artist. You've also really tapped pretty deeply into your spirituality and helping and healing others. So that really, really resonates a lot. Those can feel like such dichotomies, and yet, you've kind of traversed that in a pretty short period of time in what feels and looks from the outside pretty naturally. So I commend you with that for sure.
Well, thank you. Yeah. One of the ways you've described yourself that really made me comfortable, honestly, coming to One Heart, especially as someone who had never done something like this before and who was going alone, is I really resonated when you talk about being a bridge between two different worlds, like the business world and the spiritual world. And so much of your story resonated with me. I think maybe, I could talk to you for hours about this, but the last thing I'd share, especially for someone who's listening to this, who wants to come to One Heart, as I mentioned, I'm now really interested, comfortable, kind of living in this merged spiritual business, creative life. But I was really intimidated going in. And one of the things that really comforted me was seeing the stories of you, Gerard, some of the other people who I'm sure are going to be on the podcast, who were living in such a way where it was living both lives. I said this earlier, but I think so much of my journey has been accepting that it can be and not or. You can thrive in business and be fulfilled spiritually. You can be creative and use your head. I have learned, right, everything is a gift. And as much as we want to live in our hearts, those of us who have the skills of the head, that's a gift too. And you don't have to let one go to have the other.
Yeah. Just got to make sure we know who the master is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amac. So great having you here. So much wisdom you're able to share, and I'm sure we'll see you soon on a One Heart journey at some point.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon.
All right. Take care. We are very grateful to our guests for sharing their stories of transformation with One Heart, and we hope their wisdom will support you in your life journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss out. If you're a heart-centered leader or conscious creator who's ready to level up your life and impact in the world, we humbly invite you to apply to our next One Heart journey. One Heart was created to support leaders like you to live and lead from a place of true alignment, fulfillment, and joy. Our 8-week Human Life Accelerator is built around a 1-week journey to Costa Rica with sacred psychedelic plant medicine and a world-class experience that blends many ancient and modern modalities for growth. Before and after this journey, we help you prepare and integrate all your breakthroughs with our 5-star experience. Over 500 amazing leaders have joined One Heart on our journeys over the past 4 years. If you'd like to apply to join our next journey, head over to oneheart.com. That's the number 1, HEART.com to apply. Till next time.